Welcome to Michael Potts F1, everything Formula One, but from photographers' points of view. We need to talk about the 2024 calendar. There are an awful lot of people who need to travel to every single Formula One race. Let me just break in here for a second. I actually recorded this footage in the middle of 2023. It was between the flyaway races, and you can see how absolutely knackered I am. I actually didn't release the video until now because, well, I thought I was just a little bit too shattered making it. But now looking back, I think it does help illustrate how utterly exhausting the calendar can be. And I'm not the only one. When we got to Abu Dhabi, the drivers could barely keep their eyes open during the press conference. This is not a rant. I do love my job. And later, you'll hear me make a case for a 25th race. But saying that, the current collection of races is probably the least efficient calendar configuration you could possibly have. In this video, I try and make a case on how to make that more efficient, as well as suggesting a lot of ways Formula One could even improve. First off, let's look at the 2024 calendar. It has 24 races, starting with testing in February in Bahrain and ending 11 months later in Abu Dhabi. Now, if you had to base that on somebody living in London and attending all the races, flying back whenever possible, in cases where there's a week break but it's a long-haul flight, I've elected to stay out, it would look something like this. From London, we head off to Bahrain for 2 weeks, having winter testing and the first race, then to Saudi Arabia and back to London. 1 week off before we're flying off to Melbourne in Australia. Then we have a whole week off before we get to Japan and Suzuka. From there, it's another week off and Shanghai and China before returning to London. From here, we go off to Miami for a one-off event. This is completely inefficient. Then we fly to Bologna in Italy, and here I can take my first and only train ride to Monaco, back to London, and then off again to Montreal and another one-off North American race. From London, we go back to Barcelona, then we ping-pong across Europe, going to Austria, back to London for the British Grand Prix, then all the way back to Hungary. Then we head to Brussels for the Belgium Grand Prix in Spa-Francorchamps before heading back to London. And that brings us to the 3-week August break. It's off to Amsterdam, followed by Monza, then back to London. Then we have Azerbaijan, which is somehow connected to Singapore and back-to-back weekends, returning all the way to London before a few more weeks off, and then flying off to Austin, where we start our first triple header, which is Mexico City and Sao Paulo. Then we have a 2-week break, so back to London, before flying off to Las Vegas for another one-off North American event. And then we have the final intercontinental triple header, which is Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. If you calculated all of the travel distance for that person, it would come up to 157,390 kilometers traveled. Surely we can do better. Alright, so there's a number of things that I would like to see changed in the calendar. We have 24 races, but are these the best 24 races we could possibly have? I don't think so. Firstly, I remove 3 races which aren't that exciting. The first race on my chopping block is Bahrain. Currently, it's the season opener, and I really don't understand why this is, because in 2022 it had the fewest number of spectators. Yes, it does provide some very exciting racing, and photographically there's some brilliant spots to shoot from. However, I think Qatar did a pretty good job, and the racetracks are very, very similar. I can't see a reason for having both. And I think Bahrain has just become a little out of date, and it's lost ground to the 3 other Middle Eastern races. Next, I would get rid of Imola. It was very, very sad that we didn't go there this year, but I don't think the calendar suffered for us not being there. It's a fairly difficult track to get to, accommodation is always a bit of an issue, and there's a much better event a few kilometres up the road in Monza. I don't think the track offers enough difference to warrant its place on the circuit. And thirdly, I would remove Shanghai. It's a pretty dull track. Again, it's been off the calendar for a number of years, and no one has missed it. It's a difficult race to get to, it's a more complex race to visit these days, and I just don't think it's ever had a natural fan base in China. That could all change next year. The Zhou effect could bring the crowds out, and maybe it'll be spectacular. But at the moment, I haven't seen enough to warrant its place on the calendar. So that frees up 3 spots for new events. And I think all three of these need to be in places that either provide a real spectacle for a race weekend, so a fantastic track, or they go to places that have a huge Formula One fan base, but no representation yet. And I do think we need to visit each continent. So my first new track would be a street circuit in Cape Town. There's definitely a desire to have a race in the African continent. And I think South Africa could host something spectacular. Last year, the country got very close to having a race in Kyalami. It's a beautiful track, but having seen how good the Formula E race was earlier this year, I think they seriously need to look at a track based around Greenpoint Stadium in Cape Town. There's a huge amount of hotel accommodation. It'll be the race with the most spectacular views on the calendar, and there's a lot of options for making a very, very interesting track. Next, I'd have a street circuit in Seoul, Korea. Formula One has been to Korea in the past, and it didn't really work out. They built a new racing track very, very far away from the capital. It was very difficult for people to get to, and the racing just wasn't particularly good. Seoul is one of the most dynamic, electrifying cities in the world, and it'll be fantastic to see Formula One cars race around its streets. And finally, I think Formula One should make a return to the Nürburgring. Formula One should be in Germany. It used to be a huge market for the sport, and the Nürburgring is an absolute cracking racetrack. It would be one I would love to see back on the calendar. So now I'm going to say something a little bit contentious. I think we should have a 25th race. And my 25th event would be one that was proposed back in 2011. The Port Imperial Street Circuit in New York. I'm not entirely sure a New York race would still be possible, but if it was, it would be absolutely mega. The location would have the Manhattan skyline in the background, and it would be a premium destination for a Formula One race weekend. I kicked the season off with winter testing at the Paul Ricard circuit. It is a fabulous circuit, and it's one that can be reconfigured to have different layouts, so it'd be the ideal place for teams to test their new cars. I would start the season in Cape Town. I'll then have a 1 week break. Then we head to Australia for the Melbourne race. Melbourne would be back to back with Singapore. There'd be a 1 week break before we head off to Suzuka, followed by the new Seoul Street Circuit. Then a week off before heading to Miami, which is now paired with Austin, and potentially a triple header with New York. The circus would then return to Europe, where we'd start with Monaco. Monaco would be back to back with Spain. Then we have a week off before heading to Belgium, which is coupled with the new race in the Nürburgring. There'd be another week break before the British Grand Prix as a standalone event. We have a break after the British Grand Prix and then head over to Austria, which is a double header with Hungary. That brings us into the summer break. The season kicks off again in August with the Dutch Grand Prix, and it's a very nice contrast with the one that's coming up next, which is the Italian race. Then we have another week off before going to Azerbaijan. After Azerbaijan, we have a 2 week break before heading off to Canada. From there, we head off to Vegas for an absolute spectacular show. Then a week off before heading off to Mexico and Sao Paulo. Then we finish off with a triple header in the Middle East, starting at Qatar, going into Saudi Arabia, and finishing in Abu Dhabi. This will reduce the number of air miles to 132,489. That's a 17% reduction. The final thing I would look at would be a way to make the season a little bit more competitive throughout. Rather than just having one drivers' championship, I would also introduce a series of regional championships. If we had this championship system in place in 2023, the results would be incredible. It would be Max Verstappen winning absolutely everything, as he did the whole year. Just more silverware for Max. But in a more competitive championship year, this could be quite interesting. But this is pure fantasy. We can't go tearing up contracts and building new racetracks hoping they're going to be amazing at the drop of a hat. So working with the same events that we have next year, but focusing on the efficiency of travel between the events, possibly a more sensible calendar would look something like this. This allows the season to finish 2 weeks sooner, reduces the travel significantly, and hopefully cuts down on the time F1 personnel spend away from their families. Where possible, I've tried to stick to the same dates proposed by F1. What do you think of the revised calendar? Please do let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this in-depth look into calendar. I do hope you've enjoyed it. I'd love to hear about suggestions on how to improve the calendar. Goodbye.